My best friend looked me in the eyes and said, I think we need to stop doing this. No anger, no tears, just one calm sentence that made my entire body go cold. Because for almost a year, Claire and I had been trapped in something neither of us was brave enough to name. We were more than friends, less than a couple, close enough to fall asleep in each other's arms, but apparently not close enough to admit what any of it meant. And now she wanted to end it. What she didn't know was that I had already decided to tell her the truth that night, that I was completely, irreversibly, terrifyingly in love with her, and that if she walked out of my apartment before I said it, I might lose the only person who had ever made my life feel like home. My name is Leo. I'm 31 years old, and this is the story of how I almost lost my best friend because both of us were too afraid to ask for more. I met Claire 3 years earlier. We started at the same company within a month of each other. She worked in project management, I worked in design. We ended up at the same table during our first all-staff lunch because every other seat was taken. Within 5 minutes, we were arguing. Not seriously, the cheerful kind of arguing, where neither person actually wants the conversation to end. She said remote work made people less creative. I said unnecessary meetings had probably destroyed more creativity than remote work ever could. She said, you sound like someone who ignores calendar invitations. I said, you sound like someone who sends meetings that could have been emails. She stared at me for a second. Then she laughed. Not politely, a real laugh, the kind that made her nose scrunch slightly. I noticed that. I would notice it many times after that. By the end of lunch, we had exchanged numbers and made vague plans to get coffee. The coffee happened 2 days later, then again the following Tuesday, then the Tuesday after that. Without discussing it, Tuesday morning coffee became ours. Same cafe, same table near the window when it was available, same order. Claire drank an oat milk latte with too much cinnamon. I drank plain coffee and complained about the price while buying it anyway. At first, we talked about work, then families, then old relationships, then the strange, embarrassing parts of ourselves that usually take years to reveal. Claire knew I hated talking on the phone but would answer if she called. She knew I reorganized my apartment whenever I was stressed. She knew I sometimes drove around for no reason when I needed to think. I knew she pretended not to care about birthdays but secretly remembered everyone else's. I knew she watched the same comfort show whenever she was sad. I knew that when she said, "It's fine," in a very calm voice, it was usually not fine at all. Being around her required no performance. That was what made her different. I didn't have to be impressive. I didn't have to be funny every second. I didn't have to hide when I was tired, irritated, or uncertain. I could sit next to her in silence for 40 minutes and never feel pressure to fill the space. That kind of comfort is rare, and when you find it, you assume it will always be there. For 2 years, we were only friends, real friends, the person you call first kind, the person who knows before you explain kind. Claire went through a painful breakup about 18 months after we met. She had been with a man named Adrian for almost 4 years. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't dramatic. In some ways, that made it worse. He simply kept promising a future he had no intention of building. Whenever Claire asked where the relationship was going, he said he needed more time. Whenever she talked about living together, marriage, or children, he became vague. He loved having her, he just never chose her. Eventually, she ended it. She called me that night. I answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello, she just said, "I did it." I knew exactly what she meant. I drove to her apartment with takeout and stayed until almost 3 in the morning. She cried once. Mostly, she looked exhausted. That specific kind of exhaustion that comes from investing years in something and finally admitting it will never become what you hoped. For the next few months, I was the person she called when the silence became too loud. Long voice messages, late night texts, coffee before work. Once on a Wednesday, she sent me 2 words, rough day. I knew what kind of rough it was. I drove over. I wasn't doing any of it strategically, I need that to be clear. I wasn't waiting for my chance. I wasn't hoping grief would turn into romance. She was my friend. She was hurting, so I showed up. But somewhere in those months of showing up, something changed inside me.
I didn't notice it while it was happening. By the time I did, it had already become impossible to undo. The night everything shifted was after a company event, a rooftop celebration at the end of a difficult quarter. There was music, free food, and coworkers pretending 2 drinks had completely changed their personalities. Claire and I left at the same time. We lived in the same direction, so we walked together. It was cold, and she kept pulling her sleeves over her hands. We talked about nothing important, a terrible presentation from earlier that day, a coworker who had spent 20 minutes explaining cryptocurrency to people who had not asked, a restaurant we kept saying we would try and never did. Then the conversation stopped, not awkwardly, just suddenly. We were standing under a streetlight. She looked at me, I looked at her, and something that had been quietly building between us became impossible to ignore. She said, "What?" I said, "Nothing." She smiled. That didn't look like nothing. I don't remember who moved first, maybe both of us, but we kissed. It wasn't dramatic.
No music, no applause, no cinematic rain. Just my best friend standing under a streetlight with one hand against my chest. When we pulled apart, she stared at me. I waited for regret. Instead, she laughed softly and said, "Well, that complicates Tuesday coffee." It should have led to a conversation. It didn't. That was our first mistake. We walked home holding hands. The next morning, she messaged me. "Are we weird now?" I wrote, "Only if you make it weird." She replied, "Excellent emotional maturity." And somehow that became the agreement. No labels, no conversation about the future, no definition. We continued being best friends, except now she sometimes showed up outside my building at night. Now she stayed over. Now movie nights ended with her asleep against my chest. Now goodbye kisses lasted longer than they were supposed to. It felt natural, dangerously natural, like we had discovered a hidden room inside a house we already loved. For a while, I told myself the lack of a label didn't matter. We were happy, we were close. Why risk damaging something that worked? Then, 4 months later, I discovered I was in love with her. I discovered it through jealousy, which is probably the least dignified way to discover anything about yourself. We were having lunch with people from another department. A new analyst named Evan sat beside Claire. He was tall, confident, and good at the kind of conversation that makes people feel immediately included. Claire laughed at something he said, the real laugh, the nose-scrunching one, and I felt something tight and ugly move through my chest. I hated myself for it. Claire had done nothing wrong. Evan had done nothing wrong. And officially, Claire and I were nothing. That was the problem. We were nothing. Nothing with Tuesday coffee, nothing with spare keys, nothing with toothbrushes in each other's bathrooms, nothing with her head on my chest at 2 in the morning, nothing that gave me the right to feel what I was feeling. After lunch, Claire walked beside me toward the elevators. She looked at me. "You okay?" "Fine." "You got quiet." "Just tired." She watched me for a moment. Then she said, "You made a strange face when Evan asked for my number." My stomach dropped. "I did not." "You absolutely did." "What face?" She imitated me badly. I laughed because I had no better defense. She smiled, but the look she gave me afterwards lasted a second too long. That night, I started doing the math. If I told her how I felt, I could lose everything. The friendship, the routines, the private jokes, the way she called me when something good happened before telling anyone else, the way every ordinary day felt more interesting because she existed inside it. But if I said nothing, I knew exactly what would happen. Eventually, she would meet someone she could introduce as her boyfriend without hesitation, someone who would ask for a real place in her life. And I would be expected to smile, support her, and watch from the front row as another man received the life I had been too afraid to request. Neither option felt survivable. So I did what people do when neither option feels survivable. Nothing. I went to work, I bought Tuesday coffee, I answered her late-night messages. I let her fall asleep beside me. I was present for everything and honest about nothing for months. Then Evan started appearing more often. Lunch invitations,
messages about work that became messages about weekends. Claire mentioned his name casually at first. Then one Tuesday, while stirring cinnamon into her coffee, she said, "Evan asked me to dinner." My hand stopped around my cup. She looked down. "Like a date?" "I think so." "And what did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." I nodded. The movement felt mechanical. She watched me carefully. "That's all you're going to say?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." "Do you want to go?" She hesitated. "I don't know." That answer hurt more than yes, because "I don't know" meant she was considering it. I said, "You should go if you want to." Her expression changed, not dramatically, just enough for me to know I'd given the wrong answer. She said, "Right." The rest of the coffee was different. Still polite, still familiar, but something had closed. That evening, I stared at my phone for hours waiting for her to message. She didn't. The next day, nothing. Thursday, nothing. It was the longest we had gone without speaking in almost 3 years. On Friday night, she sent, "Can I come over?" I answered immediately. "Of course." She arrived holding a paper bag of food from the place near my apartment. She looked tired. Not work tired, emotionally tired. We ate on the floor with the containers between us. We half watched a movie. Neither of us mentioned Evan. Neither of us mentioned the silence. Then, halfway through the evening, she said, "Leo, do you think people change when they fall in love?" I turned toward her. The question wasn't casual. It was pointing somewhere. "I think some people do." "How?" I thought about it. "I think falling in love with the right person makes you want to become the version of yourself you've always been trying to figure out how to be." She looked at me for a long moment. "That's a very good answer." Then she leaned against my shoulder. I sat there with her weight against me, thinking, say it, tell her now. But fear is strange. It doesn't always feel like panic. Sometimes it sounds intelligent. It tells you to wait for a better moment. It tells you not to ruin a good night. It tells you one more week won't matter. So I said nothing. Again. The following Tuesday, she didn't come to coffee. She messaged 20 minutes before we were supposed to meet. "Sorry, can't make it." No explanation. I asked whether everything was okay. She replied, "Yeah, just busy." That was all. Thursday night, she came to my apartment. She didn't bring food. She didn't take off her jacket. She stayed standing near the door. That was when I knew. She said, "We need to talk." Every hopeful version of the night disappeared. I nodded. She sat at the opposite end of the couch, not beside me, opposite. Then she said, "I think we need to stop doing this." There it was, the sentence I had been afraid of for months. I asked, "Doing what?" Even though I knew. "This," she said. "Whatever this is." "Why?" She looked frustrated. "Because I don't know what it is, Leo." I didn't answer. She continued, "We act like a couple when nobody's watching. Then in public, we act like none of it means anything." "It means something to me." The words came out before I could stop them. Claire went still. "What does it mean?" That was the opening, the moment I had rehearsed 100 times, and I almost wasted it. I said, "I don't know." She laughed once, not because anything was funny, because she was hurt. "That's exactly the problem." She stood. I stood too. She said, "I can't keep doing something that feels like everything and is called nothing." My heart was pounding. I asked, "Is this because of Evan?" She stared at me. Then she said, "You told me to go." "I didn't want you to go." "Then why did you say it?" "Because I didn't think I had the right to tell you not to." Her voice rose for the first time. "You could have asked me what I wanted." "I did." "No, you asked if you wanted to go to dinner with him. You never asked what you wanted from me." I had no answer, because she was right. Claire grabbed her bag. "I can't keep waiting for you to decide whether I matter differently than everyone else." She moved toward the door, and suddenly I saw the entire future I had been trying to avoid. No Tuesday coffee, no messages at 11, no spare key, no Claire. Not because I told the truth and lost her, because I had refused to tell the truth at all. I said, "Wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. I said, "I'm in love with you." Silence. Complete silence. She turned slowly. I had imagined saying those words beautifully, calmly, like someone who had prepared. Instead, everything came out at once. "I'm in love with you. I have been for months. I knew at that lunch with Evan and probably before that. I didn't say anything because I was terrified that asking for more would cost me what we already had." She didn't move, so I kept going. "I know that doesn't excuse how confusing I've made this. I know silence isn't neutral. I thought I was protecting the friendship, but really I was protecting myself from having to hear an answer I couldn't control." Her eyes filled. I said, "When you told me Evan asked you out, I wanted to say no. I wanted to say don't go. I wanted to tell you that the thought of someone else becoming the person you call first makes me feel physically sick." A tear moved down her cheek. I took one step closer. "I don't want to be almost with you. I don't want to be the person you come home to in private while we pretend in public that this is casual." My voice shook. "I want Tuesday mornings. I want terrible movies. I want arguments about meetings and remote work. I want to know what this looks like in 1 year and 5 years and 10. She covered her mouth with one hand. I said, "I'm not asking you to promise me forever tonight. I'm asking whether you want to try for something real." For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked, "Do you know why I didn't go to dinner with Evan?" I stared at her. "You didn't?" "No." "Why?" "Because I'm in love with you, you idiot." I think my heart stopped. She laughed through her tears, the nose-scrunching laugh. She said, "I asked you about him because I needed to know if the idea of me dating someone else mattered to you." It mattered. I know that now. I made a face. A very specific face. I laughed. Then she became serious again. "I've been scared too," she said. "After Adrian, I promised myself I would never spend years waiting for someone to choose me again." The words landed hard, because without meaning to, I had placed her in the same position. Not through cruelty, through cowardice. She said, "When you told me to go out with Evan, I thought that was my answer. I thought whatever this was mattered more to me than it did to you. It didn't. I know." She stepped closer. "But I needed you to say it. I should have said it months ago. Yes, I'm sorry. I know." Then she looked at me and asked, "So what happens now?" I said, "Now I ask you properly." She waited. "Claire, will you be my girlfriend?" She stared at me. "That's your grand romantic speech? I used all my good material already." She laughed. Then she said, "Yes. We have been together officially for 6 months now. And I know 6 months isn't forever. I know there are no guarantees. Working at the same company is as complicated as you would expect. We still disagree. She still sends meetings that could have been emails. I still ignore calendar invitations until she walks to my desk and stares at me. But everything feels easier now. Not because relationships become simple when you define them, because hiding becomes exhausting. There is nothing left to manage, nothing to pretend is smaller than it is. She messages me about nothing at 11 at night. I answer. It means what it always meant. And now it also means more. I want to say something before this story ends, especially to anyone carrying feelings they are afraid to reveal because they don't want to lose what they already have. That fear is real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Sometimes telling the truth changes everything. Sometimes the other person does not feel the same. Sometimes the friendship cannot return to exactly what it was. That possibility exists. But there is something I didn't understand then. Silence changes relationships too. The undefined version is not automatically the safe version. You are still making a choice. You are choosing uncertainty. You are choosing jealousy you have no right to express. You are choosing to wait for someone else to be brave enough for both of you. And while you wait, resentment begins growing in places where honesty should have been. I almost lost Claire because I thought saying nothing was the least dangerous choice. It wasn't. It was simply the danger I had become comfortable with. So say the thing you are afraid to say. Not recklessly, not as pressure, not as a demand that someone return your feelings. Say it because people deserve the truth about the relationships they are standing inside, and because you deserve a life that is not built around pretending you want less than you do. So tell me honestly, would you risk a friendship for the possibility of real love? Or would you stay silent to avoid losing what you already have? Drop your verdict in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who may be waiting too long to say what they feel. Because here, one story always leads to another.